David Carter sat alone in his workshop, deep inside Eldoria 7, a remote human colony on the edge of the galaxy. His days were simple: fixing things, improving security systems, and staying out of trouble. But tonight, something felt off. The station's power flickered, and a strange chill filled the air. David frowned, checking the security console. The system showed no breach, but his instincts told him otherwise. Suddenly, the lights cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. David froze, his hand reaching for the plasma wrench on his table. Years in the military had taught him one thing: trust your gut. He activated night vision mode on his visor, scanning the room. And then he saw it. A shadow moved across the far side of the workshop, fast and silent. It wasn't a glitch. Someone was here. David's heart pounded. He dropped to the ground just in time. A dagger flew past where his head had been a second ago. It embedded itself into the metal wall with a sharp clang. Someone was trying to kill him. He rolled behind a metal crate, gripping his plasma wrench like a weapon. The intruder didn't speak. No threats, no warnings, just pure, deadly precision. David reached for a nearby control panel and pressed a button. Emergency lockdown activated. Steel barriers began sealing the exits, trapping both him and the attacker inside. "All right, whoever you are, you picked the wrong guy to mess with," David muttered, sweat forming on his brow. A soft chuckle echoed through the darkness. It was a woman's voice. Smooth, dangerous. "You think this cage will stop me, human?" David's blood ran cold. This wasn't just an assassin. This was something else. A hiss of energy and the sound of a cloaking device shutting down filled the air. A tall alien woman stepped into the dim green glow of the emergency lights. She was unlike any species David had ever seen. Luminous violet eyes, dark silver skin, and a bodysuit lined with glowing patterns. And she held a second dagger, spinning it effortlessly between her fingers. "You have two choices, human," she said, tilting her head. "Surrender quietly, or fight and die painfully." David exhaled slowly, gripping his plasma wrench tighter. He wasn't going down without a fight. David's grip tightened on his plasma wrench. His heart pounded, but his mind stayed sharp. Panic was useless. He had to think. The alien assassin moved like a predator, circling him, her violet eyes glowing in the dim light. The dagger in her hand spun effortlessly between her fingers. She was waiting for him to make a mistake. David didn't move. He knew the moment he lunged, she would strike faster. "Who sent you?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. The assassin smirked. "You're asking the wrong question, human." In a flash, she attacked. David dodged to the side as the dagger sliced through the air, barely missing his throat. He swung his plasma wrench at her, but she was too fast. She ducked, twisted, and struck back. Pain exploded in his arm as she nicked him with the blade. Blood dripped down his sleeve. David clenched his jaw. He needed a new plan. He backed toward his workbench, eyes scanning for anything useful. His mind raced. He had built this workshop himself. He knew every corner, every tool. The assassin noticed. "Thinking of running?" she taunted. David smirked. "No, just thinking of how to beat you." He reached behind him, pressing a hidden button under the table. A high-pitched hum filled the air. The EMP trap activated, sending a pulse through the room. The assassin's cloaking device and energy weapons shorted out, sparks flying from her suit. She staggered back, eyes widening. "Clever," she whispered. David lunged. This time, he struck first. He swung his plasma wrench with all his strength, aiming for her dagger. The impact knocked the weapon out of her hand, sending it skidding across the floor. But instead of retreating, the assassin stepped forward. Before David could react, she grabbed him by the collar, pulled him close, and suddenly, her lips crashed onto his. A kiss. David's mind short-circuited. What the hell? For a second, everything stopped. The fight, the pain, the fear. It all vanished in the heat of the moment. Then, just as quickly as it happened, she pulled away. David stood frozen, completely stunned. The assassin smirked, her breath warm against his face. "Consider it a distraction," she whispered. Before he could process what just happened, she vanished into the shadows, disappearing without a trace. David stood there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of it all. His security system flickered back online, but she was gone. Why had she hesitated? And why had she kissed him? David stood there, his mind spinning. His pulse still raced from the fight, but something else bothered him more than the attack itself. The kiss. Why? Assassins didn't kiss their targets. Was it some kind of trick? A poison? A way to confuse him? He wiped his lips with the back of his hand, his body tensed for any strange effects. But nothing happened. No dizziness, no paralysis, no death. He exhaled sharply. What the hell just happened? The room was silent now. The only sound was his own uneven breathing. He checked the security feed. Nothing. She was gone, like a ghost. David locked down the workshop, sealing every entrance. Then he went to his medical scanner and ran a full body scan. If the kiss had been a distraction, maybe she had planted something on him. A tracker, a toxin, a hidden device. The scanner beeped. No foreign substances detected. No implants, no anomalies. David leaned back against the wall, rubbing his temples. Great, so I got kissed by an assassin for no reason. But that wasn't true, was it? She could have killed him easily back there. She was faster, stronger, and more trained than him. But she didn't. She had hesitated. Why? David pulled up his system logs and scanned for any recent bounty notices. If someone had sent an assassin after him, there had to be a record somewhere. After a few minutes, he found it. A classified bounty request, encrypted and highly restricted. Whoever had placed it was powerful. And the reward for his death? A fortune. But one thing caught his eye. The bounty status. Incomplete. Tar-GT still alive. David's stomach tightened. That meant the assassin had to report back soon. She had left him alive. But was it a mistake? Or had she chosen not to kill him? His instincts told him this wasn't over. He checked the security logs one last time. And then he saw something strange. A single word had been typed into his terminal while he was distracted. One word. Run. David's breath hitched. She had warned him. The assassin wasn't just hesitating. She was breaking protocol. And that meant only one thing. Whoever had hired her wasn't just after him. They were after both of them now. David's fingers hovered over the control panel. He had a choice. Run and disappear, or stay and fight. His lips tingled from the lingering memory of that kiss, and he clenched his fists. If they thought he was just going to roll over and die, they were dead wrong. To be continued. David didn't sleep that night. How could he? An assassin had broken into his workshop. She had fought him, nearly killed him, then kissed him, and let him live. And before she left, she had given him a single word of warning. Run. He sat in front of his console, staring at the bounty notice. The price on his head was absurdly high. Someone powerful wanted him dead. But why? David wasn't a soldier anymore. He was just an engineer working in a remote colony, fixing things. What could he possibly know that made him a target? He accessed the system logs again. The bounty was issued by a private contractor, encrypted beyond normal tracking. But with some clever bypassing, David uncovered a clue. The initials ZC. His heart sank. He knew that name. Zuphos Consortium. They were a massive intergalactic weapons corporation. Ruthless, corrupt, untouchable. David had worked for them years ago, briefly, before he realized what they were truly doing. Secret experiments, weapons that could wipe out entire civilizations. He had quit and never looked back. But now, it seemed they hadn't forgotten him. A red warning flashed on his screen. Someone was trying to access his system remotely. David slammed a kill switch, cutting all connections to the outside world. His location was compromised. He had no choice. He had to leave. Now. Meanwhile, Sci-Fi stood inside a dark chamber, staring at her handler. "You failed," the cold voice said. "The target still lives." Sci-Fi's fingers curled into fists. "It's not that simple," she said. Her handler's mechanical eyes glowed. "You are an assassin, not a philosopher. Your duty is to kill, not to hesitate." Sci-Fi felt her pulse quicken. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure why she hesitated. David Carter should have been another mission, another name to erase. And yet, she had warned him to run. Why? Her handler watched her closely. "The consortium does not tolerate failure, Vena." Sira forced herself to stay calm. "Then send someone else if you're so impatient," she said coldly. "But I'll finish this my way." The handler tilted his head. "Very well. But if you fail again, your name will be next on the list." Sira turned and walked away. But deep inside, she knew. She wasn't going to finish the mission. She was going to find David first and figure out why she couldn't kill him. David moved quickly, grabbing a small emergency pack from under his workbench. Inside were credits, a modified plasma pistol, and a compact hacker's tool. His old habit of preparing for the worst was finally paying off. His hands tightened into fists. If the Xiphos consortium had found him, he wouldn't last another day here. The station was no longer safe. He had to leave. Just as he reached the exit, his security alarm blared. David's heart pounded. He spun around, weapon drawn. A figure stepped into the doorway. Sci-Fi. The alien assassin stood there, her violet eyes glowing in the dim light. She didn't hold a weapon. She wasn't cloaked. But David wasn't fooled. "You again," he said, voice sharp. "Here to finish the job." Sci-Fi's gaze locked onto his, unreadable. Then she said something that shocked him. "You need to leave. Now." David's grip on his pistol tightened. "Oh, now you care about my life." Sira took a slow step forward. "I warned you, didn't I?" "Yeah, after attacking me first." She sighed. "They sent backup." David's stomach dropped. "Who?" Sci-Fi's expression darkened. "Another assassin. A better one." David felt the air turn heavy. "If I leave, you lose your mission," he said carefully. Sci-Fi's jaw clenched. "I already lost it the moment I didn't kill you." David studied her. This was insane. She was supposed to be his enemy, but now she was saving him. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Sira hesitated, something flickering in her eyes. "I don't know." Before David could press further, his security feed flashed red. Multiple hostiles detected. Sci-Fi's face hardened. "They're here." A loud explosion shook the station. David cursed. He grabbed his pack and sprinted toward the hidden escape tunnel he had built beneath his workshop. Sira followed. David glanced at her. "You coming with me?" She smirked, pulling out her own weapon. "Looks like I don't have a choice." Another explosion ripped through the ceiling, sending metal shards flying. They both ducked, barely avoiding the blast. David activated the tunnel, sealing the door behind them. The sound of gunfire echoed above as the station fell into chaos. Sira turned to him, breathless. "We need to get off this rock. Fast." David nodded. One thing was clear. They weren't just running. They were now both targets. David and Sira raced through the underground tunnel, the echoes of gunfire still ringing behind them. The walls shook from the impact of explosions, dust raining down on them. "They're hitting the station hard," David muttered. "They're not here to capture me. They want me dead." Sira glanced at him as they ran. "That's because you're not just a target anymore. You're a loose end." David gritted his teeth. "Great. And what about you?" She didn't answer. That was enough of an answer. They'd reached the end of the tunnel, a hidden hangar where David kept a small, heavily modified starship. It wasn't pretty, but it was fast. Syra's eyebrows lifted. You had an escape plan all along. David smirked. I believe in being prepared. Before Syra could reply, a blast door behind them exploded. David spun around. A tall figure stepped through the smoke, a second assassin, wearing sleek black armor. His silver eyes locked onto them like a predator eyeing prey. Syra's face hardened. Damn it. It's Calic. David raised his plasma pistol. Friend of yours. Syra pulled out her own weapon, her voice cold. No, he's here to kill both of us. Calic didn't speak. He lunged forward. David barely had time to react before a throwing blade whizzed past his ear. He ducked as Syra charged, clashing with Calic in a blur of inhuman speed and precision. David scrambled into his ship's cockpit, fingers flying over the controls. Syra, we have to go. She dodged a brutal strike, flipping backward. Calic moved without hesitation, relentless in his attack. Syra growled in frustration. She was fast, but Calic was stronger. If she didn't end this fight now, neither of them would leave alive. David activated the ship's defense turret and fired. The blast hit Calic's armor, sending him skidding backward. Syra didn't waste a second. She kicked him hard in the chest, buying them just enough time to leap onto the ship. Go, she shouted. David hit the thrusters. The ship roared to life, lifting off just as Calic threw another blade. It sliced through the air, barely missing the hull as they shot into space. David exhaled sharply. That was close. Syra sat beside him, still catching her breath. You still want to know why I hesitated? She asked, staring at the stars ahead. David glanced at her. Yeah. Syra's fingers brushed against her lips for a brief second before she looked at him. Because you're different. David wasn't sure what to say to that. But one thing was clear now. They weren't just running for survival anymore. They were in this together. David's hands gripped the ship's controls tightly as they left the Eldoria 7 colony behind. The stars stretched out before them, vast and endless, but in the back of his mind, David knew this was only the beginning. They weren't safe yet. Behind them, the station, once a quiet home for engineers like him, was now a war zone. The Xiphos consortium had already sent more assassins, and Calic wasn't the only one hunting them. The odds were stacked against them. Syra sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the view screen. She was still breathing heavily from the fight, her face hard as stone. She didn't seem to care about the danger they were in. It was like she was always at war. David turned to her. So, what now? We just keep running forever. Syra didn't look at him, her voice low. I don't know, but we can't let the consortium win. They won't stop until we're both dead. David frowned. Then we have to stop them first. Syra turned her head, her violet eyes meeting his. How? They're a galactic empire, David. We're just two people. David smiled, though it was a little strained. You'd be surprised how much trouble two people can cause when they know what they're doing. He turned back to the controls, his mind racing. There had to be a way to take down the Xiphos consortium. They had to make them pay for sending an assassin after him, and for making his life a living hell. David's fingers tapped rapidly on the ship's interface. There's a place I know. It's a black market, full of hackers, smugglers, anyone who hates the consortium. If we can get there, we might be able to find some help. Syra didn't say anything at first, but she seemed to consider it. And how do we get past their blockades? David grinned. That's where you come in. Syra raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask further. She seemed to trust him, or at least trust his plan. He set the ship on a course for a hidden outpost in the Black Sector, far from the reach of the consortium's ships. If they could get there, they might find someone who could help them take down the consortium's operation from the inside. As they made the jump to hyperspace, David's mind turned back to what Syra had said earlier. She had hesitated. Why? The memory of her kiss was still fresh on his lips, and he couldn't help but wonder if she had some kind of hidden motive. David turned to her again, breaking the silence. Syra, Why didn't you kill me when you had the chance?" Her expression remained neutral, but David could see the flash of something: guilt, confusion. He couldn't tell. "Does it really matter?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David didn't know how to answer that. It did matter, but at the same time, it felt like asking the wrong question. But as the stars streaked past them, he realized something: he couldn't fight this war alone. Sarah was the key. Whether she liked it or not, they were in this together now. The ship rocked slightly as it made the jump out of hyperspace. David glanced at the control panel. They had reached the black sector. Ahead of them, a hidden outpost came into view, surrounded by asteroid fields and abandoned stations. It was dark, dangerous, and impossible to track, perfect for someone like David, who was trying to hide from the entire galactic system. Sarah sat in the co-pilot's seat, her arms crossed tightly. Her expression was unreadable as she stared at the screen. She didn't trust this place, David could tell. "We're here," David said, breaking the silence. "This place should be a safe zone for anyone who's looking to fight back against the consortium. It's full of people who know how to disappear." Sarah didn't answer. She didn't seem convinced. David adjusted the ship's course, carefully avoiding a field of sharp asteroid debris. The ship hummed smoothly as it approached the docking bay. He landed the vessel gently, but with a sense of urgency. Every second here felt like they were getting closer to being found. He reached for the ship's hatch, about to open it when Sarah spoke. "Do you think this place will help us?" Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it: uncertainty, fear. David turned to her. "I think it's our best chance, but we can't stay here for long." Sarah stood up and approached the hatch. "Then let's make it quick." The hatch opened, and the cold air of the station greeted them. It was an old, abandoned place, the walls littered with rust and signs of decay. The floor beneath their feet creaked, the lights flickering. But there was something else, too, a hum of activity, shadows moving in the corners. They weren't alone. David's instincts kicked in. He scanned the area carefully, taking note of the figures moving in and out of shadows. Some wore worn clothing, others had scars and weapons on display. These were people who had clearly been running from something or someone. "Stay close," David muttered. As they moved further into the station, he could hear murmurs in the distance, the faint sound of voices speaking in different languages. As they reached the heart of the station, a figure stepped forward, blocking their path. The person was tall, with gray skin and a robotic arm. He looked them up and down, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" the figure demanded, his voice gruff. David raised his hand slightly. "We're looking for someone who can help us." The figure's eyes lingered on Sarah. "You're not the first people to ask for help. But around here, trust is earned, not given." Sarah stepped forward, her gaze never leaving the stranger. "We need to stop the Xiphos consortium. I'm guessing you know something about them." The figure smirked. "We know everything about them. The real question is, how far are you willing to go to take them down?" David's heart skipped a beat. They were so close to a lead, so close to taking the fight directly to the consortium. But before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the hall. A dozen figures stepped out from the shadows, weapons drawn. "Looks like we're out of time," the stranger muttered. "Get ready." David's hand instinctively went to the plasma pistol at his side. He wasn't ready to die today, not after everything they had been through. And neither was Sarah. Without a word, she lunged into action, her weapon in hand. The final stand had begun. The room erupted into chaos as the figures moved closer, weapons raised. David instinctively reached for his plasma pistol, but Sarah was already ahead of him. With a swift move, she fired a stun shot, knocking one of the attackers off balance. The others hesitated, unsure of whether to advance or retreat. But there was no time to waste. Sarah was already charging forward, her blade flashing in the dim light. David quickly followed, his plasma pistol in hand. The attackers were closing in from all sides. but he wasn't going to let them take him without a fight. Sira moved like lightning, her strikes precise and deadly, cutting down one assailant after another. David covered her back, firing quick, accurate shots at anyone who tried to get too close. His pulse raced, but his focus was sharp. He couldn't afford to miss. "Move," Sira shouted as she dropped another attacker to the ground. David kept his eyes on their targets, backing up toward a narrow hallway. They needed to make it to the control center, the one place where they could broadcast the data they had on the Xiphos consortium. It was their only chance. A loud crash interrupted his thoughts. A large figure emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. It was the leader, tall, broad-shouldered, with a heavily armored exosuit. David's heart skipped a beat. Kalak, the assassin they had barely escaped earlier, was back, and this time he wasn't alone. A group of his elite guards stood behind him, each of them heavily armed and ready for a fight. "You thought you could escape," Kalak's voice rumbled, his face hidden behind a black helmet. "But you're nothing to the consortium." David's grip tightened on his weapon. "We'll see about that." Sira stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Kalak. "This isn't over." "Not yet." The room grew quiet for a brief moment. David's chest tightened as he watched Sira's stance. He knew she was about to do something reckless, but there was no time to stop her. With a sudden roar, Sira charged at Kalak, her blade raised high. Kalak's guards lunged to intercept, but David was right behind her, using his plasma pistol to keep them at bay. The two of them moved in perfect sync, like they had been doing this their whole lives. Sira met Kalak in the middle of the room. She swung her blade, aiming for his chest, but he blocked it with his armored gauntlet. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through the air. David fired at one of the guards who tried to flank Sira, hitting the target square in the chest. Another down. "You're mine, assassin," Kalak snarled, grabbing Sira's arm and twisting. Sira gritted her teeth and used her free hand to pull a hidden blade from her belt, slashing it across Kalak's chest. He staggered back, surprised by the sudden attack. David didn't wait. He fired again, this time hitting Kalak's helmet. The blast sent the helmet flying off, revealing a scared face beneath. "You're going to regret this," Kalak growled, reaching for his own weapon. But before he could act, Sira was already on him again, her blade flashing as she attacked with brutal speed. David stood back, watching the fight unfold. This was it. They were so close to their goal. If they could take down Kalak and his team, they could get to the control center and finish what they had started. Sira's final strike landed, and with a loud crash, Kalak went down. His guards scattered, retreating into the shadows. David took a deep breath, relief flooding through him. But there was no time to celebrate. "We need to move," Sira said, breathless but determined, "before more of them show up." David nodded. "Let's finish this." Together, they sprinted toward the control center, ready to make the final push. The consortium wouldn't know what hit them. David and Sira reached the control center, their steps heavy with adrenaline. They had made it past Kalak and his guards, but they knew that wasn't the end of the fight. The Xiphos consortium wouldn't stop until they were both dead, and it was up to them to bring it all down. The door to the control room slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a darkened space filled with glowing screens and faint hums of old technology. At the center of the room was a terminal connected to a vast network of the consortium's data. It was the heart of their operation. "We're in," David said, his voice tight. He immediately went to the terminal, his fingers flying over the keys. Sira stood watch, her eyes scanning the shadows. Every nerve in her body was on edge, waiting for the next wave of attackers to come. But right now, this room was all that mattered. David worked quickly. He had a few minutes tops before the backup systems kicked in. He pulled up the encrypted files, one after another, revealing everything. The consortium's dirty deals, military contracts, and worst of all, their plan to wipe out entire planets to secure more power. This is it, David muttered to himself, transferring the data to a secure drive. This will end them. Behind him, Sira tensed. She could hear footsteps, fast, heavy. The guards were coming. David turned to her, his face lit by the glow of the terminal. Almost done. Just a few more seconds. Sira didn't wait. She grabbed her plasma pistol and moved toward the door, preparing for whatever came next. A burst of light flashed through the hallway outside. They're here. David's fingers were flying over the keyboard, trying to finish the upload. He had no time to think about the fight now. If they didn't finish this, everything they had done so far would be for nothing. Sira took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was coming. She stepped into the hallway, aiming her weapon at the first guard who came around the corner. Bang! The guard dropped, but the sound echoed, signaling the others. Sira moved fast, her body a blur as she dodged and fired, taking down one opponent after another. David didn't look away from the terminal. He had to finish this. A voice crackled over the intercom. You can't escape. The consortium always wins. David's heart raced as the last file transferred. It was done. The data was out, and with it, the truth about the consortium would be broadcast across the galaxy. He turned to Sira. It's done. Let's go. They didn't need to say another word. David grabbed the drive, and together, they ran toward the ship. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind them, but they didn't look back. Every step was a countdown to their escape. Sira led the way, her weapon ready. She knew that they wouldn't be safe until they were in the sky, away from the consortium's reach. Finally, they'd reached the ship. David activated the controls, and the hatch sealed behind them. The engines roared to life, lifting them off the ground just as the first wave of attackers reached the landing bay. David hit the thrusters, sending the ship soaring into the stars. They were free. Sira stood at the viewport, watching the station grow smaller and smaller until it was nothing more than a dot in the distance. She didn't speak, but David could feel the weight of everything they had been through. We did it, David said quietly. Sira turned to him, her face softening. Yeah, we did. The galaxy stretched before them, vast and full of possibilities. They had fought the impossible, and now they were free to make their own future.